You know, there are moments in life that are etched into your soul, not with joy, but with a searing, unforgettable pain. Moments that redefine everything you thought you knew about love, about family, about yourself. For me, one such moment unfolded on a crisp autumn afternoon, under the benevolent gaze of a small-town church, a place where vows are whispered and dreams are spun. But for me, that day, it became the grave of a dream I hadn't even realized I still held. I remember the crispness of the air, the way the late afternoon sun gilded the stained glass windows, promising a perfect fairy tale ending. My heart, against all logic, was a bird in my chest, fluttering with a fragile, hopeful anticipation. It was my son's wedding day, you see, my only son. And despite the silence, despite the whispers, despite the glaring absence of an invitation in my mailbox, I had come. I simply had to. A mother, after all, carries her child's future in her bones, even when that child has seemingly forgotten her past. I smoothed my dress, the one I'd chosen so carefully, hoping it would speak of dignity, of quiet love, not of desperation. I took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of autumn leaves and expensive florals filling my lungs. This was it, the grand entrance. Not as a guest of honor, perhaps, but simply as his mother. Maybe, just maybe, he would see me, and in his eyes I would find a flicker of recognition, a spark of the warmth that once defined us. Hope, you see, is a stubborn thing, especially in a mother's heart. And then the church doors, grand and imposing, swung open. Not for me to walk down the aisle, no, but for him, my son. Dressed in his sharp suit, a boutiny air on his lapel, his face alight with a joyous, almost blinding happiness. My heart swelled, truly. He looked so magnificent. For a fleeting second, I imagined him running to me, sweeping me into a hug, saying, "Mom, you came." But the words that followed shattered that fragile illusion, piece by agonizing piece. He saw me, yes. His eyes met mine, not with warmth, but with a chilling, almost clinical detachment. He took a single step forward, away from the radiant bride, away from the cheering crowd, and his voice, though low, cut through the joyous murmur of the congregation like a shard of ice. "I'm sorry, Mother," he said, the words slipping from his lips with a cold precision that utterly stopped my breath. "You weren't invited. Please just go away." The world, in that instant, tilted on its axis. The air rushed from my lungs. Invited. Go away, in front of everyone. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just disowned me publicly on the most supposedly joyous day of his life. The laughter, the music, the shimmering beauty of the wedding faded into a cacophony of unbearable shame. It felt as though 1,000 eyes were suddenly boring into me, judging, pitying, or perhaps simply dismissing me. My legs, which had carried me with such hopeful resolve just moments before, now felt like crumbling pillars. The ground seemed to sway beneath me. This wasn't just a snub, it was an execution, a public severing, a final, brutal dismissal. How could my son do this? But here's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes it's not just a place of despair. Sometimes it's the solid ground from which you finally push back. That moment, standing abandoned at the threshold of my son's new life, was the end of one story. But it was, unbelievably, the explosive beginning of mine. And that's when the questions began. Not loud, angry questions, but quiet, insidious whispers in the back of my mind. How? How does a mother become uninvited to her own son's wedding? How does a lifetime of sacrifice, of sleepless nights and endless love, culminate in such a public, brutal dismissal? Was it something I did, something I didn't do, or was it something far darker, a twisted unraveling I hadn't even begun to comprehend. The sheer audacity of it, the coldness in his eyes. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about the bonds of blood, about the very definition of family. Have you ever felt that? That chilling jolt of unexpected betrayal. That deep, unsettling feeling of something being terribly, profoundly wrong in a relationship you held sacred. That moment when someone you loved, someone you poured your entire soul into, looks at you and simply sees nothing, nothing but a burden, an inconvenience, a ghost from a past they desperately want to erase. If any part of that resonates with you, that raw, gut-wrenching ache of being dismissed, overlooked, or told you don't belong, then you are exactly where you need to be. This is more than just my story. It's a testament to the quiet wars fought within families, the silent screams of the forgotten. So, if my words have sparked a flicker of recognition in your own heart, if you've ever stood on the precipice of such profound emotional pain, please, hit that like button right now. Let me know you're here, that you understand. And in the comments below, share your own story, your own moment when your world was knocked off its axis. Your voice matters, and here, you are not alone. What happened next, honestly, I still struggle to fully comprehend. But it began with those haunting questions, and a profound realization that the silence, the shame, would not be my ending. It was time to remember why I came, and the path that led me to that church door. Tell me honestly, after hearing what my son said, what you witnessed at that church door. Do you think this kind of cruelty, this sheer disrespect, is ever justified? Or was there something I might have done, something I missed, that could have led to such a heartless act? What would you have done in that unbearable moment? Your thoughts mean the world to me. Please comment below and let me know what you truly think. I'm listening. Standing there on the cold, hard pavement outside the church with his brutal words still echoing in my ears. The shock, the humiliation, it was almost unbearable. But beneath that immediate, searing pain, a different kind of ache began to surface. A slow, creeping realization that this wasn't just a sudden, monstrous act. Oh no, this was the bitter, undeniable culmination of years. Years of subtle slights, of growing distance, of a love that was slowly, meticulously erased. My mind, in that haze of public shame, involuntarily drifted back to the beginning, to him, my beautiful boy. I remembered his tiny hand in mine, the way his laughter used to fill our small home, bright and unrestrained. I remembered the endless nights rocking him to sleep, humming lullabies until my throat was raw, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The years I worked 2, sometimes even 3 jobs, just to keep food on the table, to ensure he had clothes that fit, books for school, and dreams that seemed, at the time, boundless. Every penny earned, every ounce of strength expended was for him, for his future. I sacrificed my own youth, my own desires, my very peace, believing I was weaving a tapestry of unbreakable love, of undeniable family. He was my world, truly, and he knew it. He saw it, or so I thought. When he brought home his bride, Sarah, so young and vibrant, I welcomed her with open arms, a heart brimming with joy. I saw it as an expansion of my family, another layer of love added to our already precious bond. "Mom," he'd said, "we want you to be part of everything, always." Sarah would smile sweetly, confirming his words. Such beautiful, hollow promises, now tasting like ash in my mouth. The shift, it was so subtle at first. A missed phone call, a forgotten birthday, a polite but firm, "Oh, we already have plans, Mom." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I became optional. Then inconvenient. Then, invisible, I remember when I was in the hospital that terrifying 3 weeks after my hip surgery. I lay there, counting the ceiling tiles, waiting. Waiting for his face at the door, for his voice, for a simple text. But the phone stayed silent. The room remained empty. Not a single call, not a single visit. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist, vanished from the face of the earth for the very people who should have cared for me the most. The pain of that erasure, I tell you, it was deeper than any surgical wound. I clung so desperately to every crumb of affection. A fleeting smile, a hurried "love you, Mom" before he hung up. I made excuses for him for them. He's busy, they have a new life, it's just a phase. But deep down, the bitter truth was fermenting. I was no longer a mother, a grandmother. I was a relic, a burden, a forgotten chapter in a story they were rewriting without me. And standing at that church door, facing his cold, dismissive gaze, it all converged. Every missed call, every empty chair at the holiday table, every whispered excuse. It solidified into one brutal, undeniable fact. I was not uninvited by accident. I was uninvited on purpose. I was a deliberate omission. And in that moment, as the whispers of the past turned into screams of the present, I realized the full, agonizing extent of their betrayal. But that realization, it was not the end of me. Oh no, it was the absolute, undeniable beginning of everything else. The realization, that biting, undeniable truth that I was deliberately uninvited, it was like a final, devastating blow. My mind, still reeling from the public humiliation at the church door, now drifted back to the agonizing weeks leading up to that day. The silence from my son, the conspicuous lack of any formal invitation, the vague, dismissive answers if I dared to ask. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay home, to protect what little dignity I had left. Why go, Mabel? I'd whisper to my reflection in the dim morning light. Why subject yourself to more pain, more rejection? But then, a different voice, a more primal, insistent one would rise from deep within me. It was the voice of a mother who had carried this boy, nurtured him, loved him with a fierceness that defied logic. How could I not witness this monumental moment in his life? How could I simply not be there? It felt unholy, like tearing a fundamental thread from the fabric of my own existence. Even if he no longer wanted me, a part of me, a deep maternal instinct, still needed to be there. I needed to see him, to confirm with my own eyes that he was truly happy, truly moving forward. Perhaps even to offer a silent blessing, a final act of unconditional love, even if it was wholly unappreciated. The journey itself became a testament to this agonizing, conflicting love. Physically, my hip still ached, a dull, persistent throb that reminded me of my own fragility. Every step, every twist was a minor protest from my aging body. Financially, it was a stretch. I didn't have much, certainly not enough for a fancy outfit or an easy taxi ride. So I took the bus, then another, feeling the miles tick by, each one carrying me further from the safety of my quiet apartment and closer to the precipice of what? More pain, a miracle, I didn't know. I simply kept moving, propelled by that stubborn, desperate hope. I remember staring out the bus window, watching the familiar Tennessee landscape blur past. The rolling hills, the golden fields under the autumn sun. They seemed so serene, so indifferent to the storm brewing within my soul. I kept replaying conversations, trying to find a clue, a reason for his coldness. Was it Sarah? Had she turned him against me, or had he simply changed, grown away from the loving boy I once knew into this stranger? the questions gnawed at me, relentless, unanswered. As the church steeple came into view, piercing the clear blue sky, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo in my chest. What if he truly threw me out? What if everyone stared? The humiliation, it could be unbearable. But then, another thought, sharp and clear, cut through the fear. I had come this far. I had faced countless disappointments, countless moments of being overlooked. This was, in a strange way, my final stand. A silent declaration that I still mattered. That my love, however unwanted, still existed. My legs felt heavy, but my resolve solidified with each step closer. The air vibrated with suppressed excitement, the distant murmur of arriving guests. I could smell the celebratory flowers, hear the faint, joyous strains of a string quartet. Every sensory detail amplified the cruel irony of my presence. I was walking into a celebration of love, carrying a heart shattered by its absence. And then I was there, at the grand, ornate doors where so many joyous families had entered. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the cold, brass handle. What lay beyond this threshold? Acceptance, or final, utter rejection? I drew a breath, steadying myself. I had to know, I had to see, this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, my peace, my closure. And as the doors swung open, not for me to walk down the aisle, but for him to step out, that painful reality, sharp and brutal, finally began to unfold. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the cold, brass handle. What lay beyond this threshold? Acceptance, or final, utter rejection? I drew a breath, steadying myself. I had to know, I had to see, this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, my peace, my closure. And as the doors swung open, not for me to walk down the aisle but for him to step out, that painful reality, sharp and brutal, finally began to unfold. And then he was there, my son. Dressed in his sharp suit, a boutonniere on his lapel, his face alight with a joyous, almost blinding happiness. My heart swelled truly. He looked so magnificent. For a fleeting second, I imagined him running to me, sweeping me into a hug, saying, "Mom, you came." But the words that followed shattered that fragile illusion, piece by agonizing piece. He saw me, yes. His eyes met mine, not with warmth, but with a chilling, almost clinical detachment. He took a single step forward, away from the radiant bride, away from the cheering crowd, and his voice, though low, cut through the joyous murmur of the congregation like a shard of ice. "I'm sorry, Mother," he said, the words slipping from his lips with a cold precision that utterly stopped my breath. "You weren't invited. Please just go away." The world, in that instant, tilted violently on its axis. The air rushed from my lungs, leaving my chest aching hollow. Invited? Go away, in front of everyone. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just disowned me publicly on the most supposedly joyous day of his life. The laughter, the music, the shimmering beauty of the wedding faded into a cacophony of unbearable shame, a deafening silence that screamed louder than any shout. It felt as though 1,000 eyes were suddenly boring into me, judging, pitying, or perhaps simply dismissing me as an unwelcome spectacle. Oh, the humiliation! It was a physical weight, pressing down on my fragile shoulders, threatening to buckle my knees. My legs, which had carried me with such hopeful resolve just moments before, now felt like crumbling pillars. The ground seemed to sway beneath me. This wasn't just a snub, it was an execution, a public severing, a final, brutal dismissal. How could my son, do this? How could the child I nurtured, the life I built, now be the architect of my deepest public shame? I stood there, frozen, a living statue of heartbreak at the very threshold of his happiness. The scent of roses, moments ago so sweet, now smelled like bitter ashes. My throat was tight, choked with unshed tears and unspoken pleas. And then, in that agonizing, eternal second, something shifted within me. A tiny, almost imperceptible click. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a clarity that cut through the fog of pain. A realization so stark, so undeniable that it jolted me awake. This wasn't my shame. This was his. This was the measure of his character, his compassion, or utter lack thereof. This was his choice, his public declaration of who he truly was. And in that moment, as his eyes, cold and unwavering, bore into mine, expecting me to crumble, to plead, to simply disappear, I didn't crumble, I didn't plead. My lips, which had been trembling, now firmed. My shoulders, though aching, straightened just a fraction. I looked at him, truly looked at him, not with the blind love of a mother, but with the clear, piercing gaze of a woman who had just seen her entire world shatter, and chosen, in that very instant, to rebuild it, brick by painful brick. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of my tears. Not here, not now, I had endured enough. My presence was, in itself, a statement. My dignity, though bruised, was still mine to command. But I didn't beg, I didn't argue. I simply turned. Slowly, deliberately. Each step away from that church door, each step away from my son, felt not like retreat, but like a profound, powerful declaration of independence. The air around me, moments ago thick with humiliation, now felt strangely lighter. That unbearable public severing, it wasn't the end of me. Oh no. It was, unbelievably, the explosive beginning of mine. A beginning I never, ever saw coming. Walking away from that church, the sounds of celebration fading behind me, I felt a strange mix of emptiness and something new. A clarity, a profound shift. The questions still lingered, heavy in the silence, but a different kind of thought began to emerge. What now? What do you do when the most sacred bond shatters so publicly? What do you do when home, love, and family all turn their back on you? That's when the true understanding, the quiet revelation, truly began to settle in my soul. Each step I took away from that beautiful, brutal place felt like shedding a layer of old skin. The humiliation, the searing pain of his words, they didn't vanish, no, but they began to recede, like a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving behind a stark, cold landscape. My vision, once blurred by unshed tears, now felt impossibly clear. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth I had stubbornly refused to see, clung to with every desperate fiber of my being. The son I had known, the son I had loved, the son I had raised, he was gone. And perhaps he had been gone for a very long time. This man at the church door, so cold, so dismissive, was a stranger wearing the face of my child. And in that shattering realization, a strange, quiet peace began to bloom in the barren landscape of my heart. I walked aimlessly for a while, the crisp autumn air a welcome balm on my flushed cheeks. I passed quaint storefronts, children laughing, couples holding hands, snapshots of the life I had built, the life I had hoped for, now felt impossibly distant, alien. My feet carried me through streets I'd once driven with George, pointing out future homes, dreaming of grandchildren. Oh, the irony! Here I was, a grandmother, publicly cast out by her only child on his wedding day. The bitterness, for a moment, threatened to engulf me. But then, that new, quiet peace asserted itself again. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was acceptance. A profound, bone-deep acceptance that the relationship I had so desperately clung to, the one-sided love I had poured into, was truly, irrevocably dead. And in that death, paradoxically, lay a new beginning, a liberation. I no longer needed to chase his approval. I no longer needed to make excuses for his silence. I no longer needed to convince him of my worth, of my existence. He had made his choice. And now, it was time for me to make mine. I found myself pausing by a quiet stream, its gentle murmur a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind just moments before. I looked at my reflection in the water, an old woman, yes, with lines of sorrow etched around her eyes, but also, for the first time in what felt like forever, a glimmer of something else. Not just sadness, not just pain, but defiance. A fierce, quiet knowing. My purpose in his life, as a constant, sacrificing mother, had been brutally severed. But my purpose in my life, that was still entirely up to me. My mind drifted back to George again. Not his final, heartbreaking words about the house this time, but his quiet strength. His unwavering self-reliance. He built things with his hands, solid and real. He lived by principles, not by the fickle affections of others. He taught me about dignity, about seeing your own worth, even when the world outside might try to diminish it. And in that moment, beside that flowing stream, I made a new promise. Not to George, not to my son, but to myself. I would not disappear. I would not be defined by his rejection. I would not let this be my ending. The last tear I shed that day wasn't for him. It was for the beautiful, innocent dream of a family that had shattered. It was for the naive part of me that had believed love conquers all, even when it's utterly unreciprocated. And then I wiped it away. A clean slate. Because in that profound moment of letting go, of acknowledging the bitter truth, I realized that I no longer belonged there, at his wedding, in his life, or chained to the ghost of what our relationship once was. I belonged to myself. And that realization, that feeling of reclaiming my very soul, was the most powerful, liberating truth I had ever known. That realization, that feeling of reclaiming my very soul, was the most powerful, liberating truth I had ever known. But truth, while liberating, doesn't pay the bills or mend a broken heart overnight. Walking away from that church, from my son, from the ghost of my old life, meant I truly was on my own. And for an elderly woman, with a still healing hip and a modest pension, starting completely fresh was, frankly, terrifying. Yet a stubborn resilience, one I hadn't known I possessed, began to stir within me. I remembered George's words, not just about the house, but about building something solid, something peaceful. And suddenly, the thought of building a new life, a life entirely on my terms, felt not like a burden, but like an exhilarating, albeit daunting, adventure. I needed a place to call my own, a sanctuary free from the echoes of betrayal. It took time, patience, and a surprising amount of paperwork, but I found a small, sunlit apartment on the edge of town. It was modest, yes, but it hummed with a quiet independence. Every morning, waking up to the gentle light filtering through my own window, in my own space, was a profound, daily affirmation of my freedom. Oh, the quiet joy of it. With the burden of expectation lifted, with the constant, gnawing anxiety of his unpredictable calls, his dismissive glares finally gone, I felt lighter, truly lighter than I had in years. It was like shedding an impossibly heavy skin. For so long, my days had been defined by what I should do, what they needed, what I owed. But now my time was my own. My choices were my own. I started doing things I hadn't had time for, things I'd long forgot how much I loved. I rediscovered the joy of reading for hours, lost in worlds far removed from my own pain. I started tending to a small potted garden on my balcony, watching new life bloom, much like my own spirit. Each sprouting leaf, each fragile flower, felt like a small victory. This newfound freedom wasn't just about physical space or hobbies. Oh no, it was about rediscovering myself. The Mabel who existed before the shadows crept in, before the years of quiet neglect. I started reaching out, not to those who had wounded me, but to those who genuinely nourished my soul. I reconnected with Marjorie, an old friend who had always seen me, truly seen me, even when my own family chose to look away. Our phone calls turned into weekly visits, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the comforting clink of teacups. She was a beacon of light, a reminder of genuine connection. And then, the most unexpected form of revenge began to unfold. It wasn't about vengeance, not truly. It was about principle. My life, blooming brightly and independently, became a silent, undeniable testament to my worth. I heard whispers, of course. People talk. News travels, especially in small towns. I heard that my son's new marriage wasn't quite the fairy tale he'd presented. That the pressures of his life, his work, his own demanding nature, were beginning to show. I heard that his new wife, Sarah, was struggling with the reality of living with his controlling personality, perhaps even regretting their decision. I heard that the grand facade he'd built was beginning to crack, but I didn't revel in their misfortune. Honestly, I didn't. There was a quiet understanding, a profound sense of justice served, not by my hand in anger, but by the natural consequences of their own choices. The bitterness that once threatened to consume me had faded, replaced by a deep, almost serene gratitude for this unexpected, albeit painful, path to liberation. My life, vibrant and meaningful, was the ultimate response to his dismissive "go away." He thought he was erasing me, but he had, inadvertently, set me free to truly live. This journey of profound self-discovery, learning to truly value myself independent of external validation, was the greatest gift. My heart felt light, truly light, for the first time in what felt like forever. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and I was living life exactly on my own terms, finally. My freedom, my peace, my quiet strength, these were my ultimate triumphs. And this journey, from the public humiliation at a church door to this profound inner peace, brings me to the most vital lesson I've learned. A lesson about your own inherent power, your untouchable shield. Because your story, no matter how painful, holds incredible strength, waiting to be unleashed. And this journey, from the public humiliation at a church door to this profound inner peace, brings me to the most vital lesson I've learned. A lesson about your own inherent power, your untouchable shield. Because your story, no matter how painful, holds incredible strength, waiting to be unleashed. You know, there was a time, not so long ago, when I believed my worth was tied to how my son saw me, to how my family treated me. I believed love meant enduring endless slights, forgiving endless betrayals, clinging to a hope that simply wasn't there. I thought a mother's job was to endlessly sacrifice, to quietly disappear when her children no longer needed her, to simply not take up space. Oh, how profoundly wrong I was. That church door, that cold dismissal, it cracked open a truth I desperately needed to face. It revealed that sometimes, the very people you've poured your life into can be the ones who drain you dry, who diminish your spirit until you're but a faint echo of yourself. But here's the absolute, unshakable core of what I learned. Your true power, your ultimate security, doesn't lie in external things like a grand house, or even in the validation of others. It lies entirely within you. It's in the quiet knowing of your own worth, the fierce protection of your own spirit. This is the deepest lesson of my life. You are your own most powerful talisman. Your self-awareness, your unwavering belief in your own value, and your resolute refusal to be defined by someone else's cruel rejection, that is your untouchable shield. When you truly know who you are, when you stand firmly in your truth, no external force, no betrayal, no closed door can ever truly diminish your spirit. This isn't just about reclaiming a relationship. It's about reclaiming your very essence, your right to exist fully and powerfully. I often have people come to me now, sometimes strangers who have heard my story, the coffee lady who took the land, they call me, or the grandma who walked away. Women who feel invisible, who have been silenced for too long. They come with their own heartbreaking tales of being overlooked, mistreated, or simply made to feel gone by their own families. I listen. I offer tea. And if they ask for advice, I give only what I know, distilled from the crucible of my own pain. That silence is not love. And forgiveness is not permission to return to harm. You have every right to protect your peace, to walk away from what poisons your soul, no matter how sacred the bond once seemed. The profound revelation for me was that the very act of fighting back, of standing up for myself when I felt weakest, didn't just win a legal battle, didn't just earn me a new home. It ignited a fire within me that transformed everything. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about validation. It was about proving to myself that I mattered, that my life mattered. This journey, born from betrayal, became the unexpected catalyst for finding my deepest strength and my most authentic self. The freedom I found on the other side was far more valuable than any property, any relationship I thought I needed. It was the freedom of simply being, truly, unapologetically, wonderfully being. My days are quieter now, and finally mine. I live in a small white house with green shutters on the edge of a forest, where the mornings begin with tea and birdsong, and the evenings end with golden lamplight and the rustle of pine trees. The rocking chair on my porch creaks like an old friend, reminding me that I am still here, still choosing peace over noise. Last month, a letter came from my son. He said sorry. He said he left Sarah. I read his words, folded them gently, and placed the letter in my drawer. I forgave him, yes, in my heart for my own peace. But I didn't write back. Some doors don't need reopening to heal. Each night I whisper to George's photo. I didn't sign it, and I didn't become a shadow. Then I sleep, light as air, dreaming only of trees and the quiet I finally earned. This is my true ending, a beginning. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for listening, not just to a tale, but to a journey of dignity, resilience, and quiet strength. Mabel's story wasn't just about a wedding invitation or a shattered bond. It was about people like her. Elders who were once seen as a burden, as disposable, but in truth, are the deep roots holding entire families together, even when those families try to cut them off. In the end, she didn't just walk away from a wedding. She reclaimed her voice, her worth, and her profound power to choose peace over silence. If you believe that older people deserve to be heard, respected, and remembered, subscribe to Grandma True Sad Stories today. Here, we share deeply emotional and powerful true stories each week about grandmothers, mothers, and those who were once forgotten, but found their strength when no one expected it. Click subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that just might change how you see the world. Grandma True Sad Stories, because truth has no expiration date, and courage is never too late. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and keep reclaiming your magnificent life.